Greetings, my noble knights, it is I, Blaze Templar, and we have the Pokemon Sword and Shield gameplay that will be playing in the background. As of this moment, it is actually muted, and I wanted to talk about this news. Pokemon Sword and Shield stuff was revealed during the E3 event this year, as you are probably aware, and it recently has been appearing on Twitter because of the issues that have happened. Involving Sword and Shield's decisions with mostly the national Dex is the big sticking point for a lot of fans. So I am going to take a moment to clarify what at least I've gathered from various sources and information from other major YouTubers and from watching these videos that I've gathered. I could be wrong to an extent on some of these things, so feel free to comment below and show me like direct links to timestamps or whatever to help clarify. I'm going to try to keep this very respectful, and I do have a lot of passion for the Pokemon franchise, as you might have guessed by now, as I've been doing this Pokemon thing, at least on YouTube, since like 2007. So, yeah, kind of crazy. I'm sorry I yawned in the middle of that. It is like almost midnight at this point. But let's go ahead and, again, like I said, talk about the major controversy with the National Dex. So it was revealed that Pokemon Home will accept, I believe, all Pokemon, but you won't be able to transfer all Pokemon from the Pokemon Home to Sword and Shield. Only Pokemon that are allowed in the Galar Dex. And from the way I understand it, these other Pokemon are not actually programmed in the Dex because it takes too much resources and programming and such. So only Pokemon of Galar will be allowed. What this means is all new Pokemon, of course, go figure, you'd have to be able to have all of those. And then whichever Pokemon that are old that fit into this region. I believe Tyranitar was one of them, which is kind of, yay me, I'm happy about that. But that being said, this is actually a big deal. So what this means is unless they actually decide to reverse this decision, possibly delay the game by who knows how many months, probably 5 to 6 months, or even more. I doubt it, though, because the main programming would be all done and they just need to program in all the other Pokemon. Still a pain in the neck, but you're reusing moves because you have your entire move list already coded in. You just mostly have to code in each sprite, so it'd be a little bit quicker that way. Or, 3D model, we don't really use sprites anymore. So it still would be a bit of a mess, especially if they are actually very expressive in battle, which some of them showed some pretty big expressiveness. And some of them on the world map. Those are all big issues, of course, that have to be considered. But overall, you don't actually have to program nearly as much as some people are saying, so I'd guess it'd probably be a delay of up to 6 months, depending on how big they actually make the National Dex. If it's like 600 Pokemon for the National Galar Dex, you'd be doing okay with a couple months of programming. If it's only like 150, it could take a little longer than 6 months, to say the least. Regardless, this here looks amazing. This part where you're like sneaking around the grass, hunting down these Pokemon and trying to capture them. It looks pretty cool, to say the least. But, and some people are saying the lack of National Dex, only Galar Dex, is perfectly fine. I don't mind. That's okay. That's something I don't mind at all. I can understand your feelings on that, but and on a competitive standpoint, I personally can understand it too. I've worked with restricted formats before, and I don't mind restricted formats. They can be a lot of fun, but when you're restricting the entire game by just this Galar Dex, you're drastically limiting things like roulettes, you're drastically limiting things like random battles, which you might not be able to do normally, But you can easily roll a random number generator, get those Pokemon, and have a random battle. Or various challenges like this. You can't Nuzlocke using a randomizer like you could in X and Y with this setup. Or you can, but it's a much more limited randomizer. So that's a problem, just from the YouTube standpoint. And that's not even considering the human element. A lot of these Pokemon have been with these trainers that are wanting to play this new game since Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. I have a friend personally who's had a Beautifly, I believe, since Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald era, the game them, and has transferred them up all the way to Gen 6, I believe. I don't know if they've transferred them to Gen 7. They have a copy of 7. I just don't know if they transferred. So that is quite literally over a decade of being with this one Pokemon, a contest Pokemon that the trainer really, really cared about, obviously. And there's something special about Pokemon that you transfer from one generation to another. For me, that's mostly relegated to the XY era of transferring up, but I still have Pokemon from Diamond, Pearl, Platinum era that I've transferred all the way up. Mostly event Pokemon or shinies that... I can't believe just how ridiculous this is. I'm so sorry. Mostly shinies or event Pokemon that I caught during this generation that actually mean a fair bit to me. Like the event Raikou, Entei, and Suicune from that generation. I've never used them in battle, and honestly, their IVs and their IVs and EVs and stuff are not ready to be used, and you can't fix IVs without like bottle caps. So you have these elements that obviously I'm not keeping them because I want to use them competitively. They're a memory of mine. I went and found these Pokemon through these events at GameStop. I stopped in, got the card, and got the Pokemon. And I remember very clearly that time because it was a special kind of occasion getting these Pokemon. I remember getting Zeraora. I remember getting all these awesome Pokemon. And now you're telling me that these Pokemon that I've been getting caught for, goodness, since Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald era to now are no longer valid. I've transferred Pokemon all the way from Pokemon Coliseum onto Emerald, onto Diamond, onto Heart Gold. I had to do a little bit of juggling. I could have just gone from Diamond, but at that time I didn't have that ability, so I didn't. And from Heart Gold up to Black and White. From Black and White 2, to X and Y, to Oris, from Oris all the way to Sun and Moon, and now Ultra Sun and Moon. I have Pokemon that have spread since the beginning of this system, and I almost left Pokemon. I'm going to be honest. I almost left Pokemon because of the divide from Gen 2 Pokemon and Gen 3, where you couldn't bring your Pokemon over from Gen 2 because of the technological limitations of the hardware. And I understood that, and it bit. I understood, though, so I accepted it eventually. It did sour my first impressions of Pokemon, though, for Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. And I think that's one of the big reasons why that generation is perhaps the generation I dislike the most by quite a stretch. Because all the Pokemon that I had spent thousands of hours with, and I'm not kidding, literally thousands of hours with, I leveled up team after team of my favorite Pokemon. I had like 6 scissors that I manually raised just trying to get the perfect one. I didn't understand DVs back then. I didn't understand initial values back then. I didn't understand any of these things. And I was doing my best to try to get the perfect scissor because I loved that Pokemon. And I mean, competitively back then, it wasn't very good. I mean, it was okay-ish for like Baton Pass, but I didn't do it then because I wanted because I was playing competitively. I loved the Pokemon. And so I did this over and over and over again with so many Pokemon. And with Scissor back then, you could only get like 1 metal coat. So you had to restart the game. And I had 3 copies of Gold, or I had a copy of Gold, Silver, and Crystal. My copy battery died on Gold. My battery died on Crystal, and eventually it died on Silver. And I got replacements on 2 of those 3. And I didn't get a replacement battery on Crystal, but it still hurt. It tore me apart, and I'm so glad that I had all those Pokemon transferred onto Stadium. But because I don't have that original file anymore, I would have to capture every Pokemon to get them off of Pokemon Stadium. And let me tell you, that hurts so much. But at least they're still on Pokemon Stadium 2 in the box. I have them even if I can't reach them. And I'm actually tearing up a little bit about that because I put so much time in. I remember Mom sitting behind me so many times. I'd be on the floor like at the house we used to have out in boondock nowhere, and I'd be on my N64 playing Pokemon through the expansion pack, and Mom would be just over there watching, or she'd be in the kitchen cooking or something, and we'd talk. We would do things, and those are very precious memories to me. I can't go back to those times. Mom's gone now. And so you can see that this transferring system actually means a lot to a lot of people. And my story is pretty tame compared to a lot of people. It's not like the story that I saw recently on Twitter where this guy was talking about how one of his best friend who passed on gave him a copy of his Pokemon, and he's been carrying those Pokemon with him ever since Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald version, the Gen 3, happened. He's been carrying them with him every single generation since then, and that's his only memory of his friend. So can you see why these Pokemon mean so much to people? And I know this has gone from news to kind of a personal rant, which isn't what I wanted to do, but I kind of lost my grip a little bit, and I'm sorry. But yeah, no, this problem is something that I'm struggling with personally right now. I currently have the pre-orders of these 2 games paid in full, but at the moment, I'm not even sure if I want to get these games. I can still play competitive Pokemon on Showdown, and I probably will, if only to keep my skills up, at least somewhat. But there's no magic there. I would love to play with these Pokemon, don't get me wrong. And if the YouTube community wants me, if the PokeTube community that we've fostered together still wants me to play these games on stream, I will. But I don't think I'm going to enjoy them as much as I was going to originally. The magic's been kind of cut short. So, yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to leave it up to you guys. I probably will cancel the pre-order, or at least I'm really seriously thinking about it. And that might delay when we start the stream, if we even do this. So, yeah, no, it's tough. It's really tough. And yes, I did dislike the video, as you could tell, just because this is such an important thing. And with Pokemon, you're removing a core aspect of your game when you do this. And I understand that some people are saying, well, it's for competitive balance, but again, you can have competitive balance without removing the Pokemon. All you have to do is put in formats, put in rules. You've done this before. Look at Pokemon Stadium. That system was all about the rules. You had the Poke Cup. You only could use level 50 Pokemon. You could not use legendary Pokemon, and you could not use certain things. You had the Prime Cup, which allowed everything. You had the Pika Cup, which was like level 25 Pokemon. You had Little Cup, which was all like level 5 Pokemon. You had these rules to begin with. You can make these rules. It is not hard. That is not a good reason to remove things. I mean, you're even doing it now with the Sun and Moon series. For example, Sun and Moon series had things like you could not have Mega Pokemon, you could not have Z Crystals, you could not use Primals. And it had a very fascinating metagame because of it. But then you moved into Ultra, and you started allowing some of these other things. And so the metagame adapted, it evolved. It was just like Pokemon in that regard. And so you can put these rules in, Game Freak. You have done it before. And this excuse does not work. It really doesn't. Not when you have the ability to put these rules into play so easily. You can put a blanket ban on certain types of Pokemon. The ones you don't like. I mean, you have a season right now of singles on the battle spot where it will be starting soon anyway, where you cannot use any Pokemon that were in the top 30 used over the last so many seasons. So you have to think innovatively and uniquely with these kinds of rule sets, and those are fun. I'm currently in a rule set that only allows what are known as rarely used Pokemon, which are usually hard hitters that are very slow or very fast but very fragile Pokemon that don't usually hit terribly hard or have some horrific weaknesses, like a 4x weakness to rock. Things like that. You can have these kinds of rules. You can put in a metagame tier list for competitive play. It is not something you can't resist. It's not something you cannot do. It is something you can do, Game Freak. And so this argument for competitive balance does not hold water one bit. It is obviously to save time, get this game out as fast as possible, and cut costs where they can. And I find that unacceptable. I really do. And unfortunately, I decided to spit accidentally because I got a little too eager and emotional, and let's wipe that screen clean with an alcohol wipe pad because I like to make sure things are nice and clean. But regardless, that being said, that is why I do not have quite as much passion for Sword and Shield at the moment, and why the arguments used by Game Freak at the moment do not work. So, you could say, well, yeah, there are 1,000 Pokemon, and they all have to be programmed in, and that's true. But here's the thing. Do you know how programming Pokemon actually works? Well, unless you're a developer or a programmer, you probably don't. And I obviously don't know everything about it because, again, I'm not an actual programmer. I have done some coding. I have done a little bit of programming, but not for video games. More for web design kind of stuff. I've done a little bit of that kind of coding. But basically what you would do is you have your base code, like for your types. Fire would be all coded in. Then you would have your abilities programmed in. Intimidate, Contrary, whatever your abilities are, you would program them in individually. And do you notice I haven't actually touched the Pokemon yet? And that's because I don't need to yet. I'm still coding in all the other details. Then you would program in all your moves. And then you can, what you do is you have your placeholders for each Pokemon. You can see this in earlier generations where they actually have placeholder symbols like a question mark and stuff. Or Missing No, that's a placeholder too. So you have your placeholder Pokemon, and you program them with your types, which at this point you've got your types in, so you have to do is tell it what types it is. Then you tell it what moves it can learn, you tell it what its stats are, and then you tell it what its abilities can be. And then the computer system does all the rest when it comes to programming the stats and everything else in. I mean, you do have to program in the sprites, but these 3D models actually look like the 4K ones from the Pokemon games, which means I'm talking like the 3DS and the Switch, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Like, that Arcanine looks exactly like the Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu one. Togekiss? Oh yeah, no, these are actually the 3D sprites from those games. So you then take those 3D models that were made for Sun and Moon that were then downscaled and transfer the majority of them in. That covers all of your old Pokemon almost instantly. It would take a little bit of time to ensure that each model goes to the right place. Absolutely. No arguing that. But you have your models. You have your set data. This is all taken care of. in a relatively quick fashion at that point. I mean, obviously it takes time because of the sheer number of Pokemon. I'm not going to argue that again. But then you program in each of your new Pokemon the animations and stuff. And that's, again, probably the biggest problem for the system. But that being said, again, programming these things in is not the hardest thing in the world. Not with the current system. Because they have all the data they need for the most part, except for new Pokemon. Again, you have the vast majority already there. You have the Lucario model. All you have to do is transfer it into the Switch. And yeah, it takes time, but you're risking alienating a huge fan base and honestly upsetting a huge chunk of the fan base too. So you have these elements. And so it's something you kind of need to consider when you're doing this sort of thing. And yeah, I'm about done now, but I just wanted everyone to think about this a little bit because it is very depressing to say the least. I don't want to see Pokemon that are favorites of certain people not be included. For example, say your favorite Pokemon is Lilligant. I don't know why your favorite Pokemon is Lilligant, but it is. And so Game Freak's saying, well, you're not going to be able to play with Lilligant because it's not in the game. We could code it in, and it would take a little bit of time, but we're not going to. And that's the problem I have with the current system. And what's more, if we accept this idea that, well, you can only transfer in certain Pokemon to Galar region with Sword and Shield, on a main series Pokemon game, they'll repeat it again. And some people have argued that you couldn't have all your Pokemon in any earlier game. And to a degree, you have a point. To a degree, though, that's the problem with that. Let's see. You couldn't get them all in Emerald, Ruby, and Sapphire. But those were the first games after, well, everything happened. And with the technological divide of consoles. And it was a big deal, and it severely hurt the fan base, among other reasons. But for a lot of fans, they hung up their Pokeballs and never came back. And understandably so. They'd done what I'd done. They'd spent thousands of hours on these beloved Pokemon. So it's a bad idea overall. And yeah, it's just I'm kind of mind blown right now still that I'm thinking about this because it is so rough to think about, but it needs discussed. It really does. And so, like I was saying before, I got distracted by just this upset again, and I apologize. What happens if this game does incredibly well? What it tells Game Freak right now, if they don't change anything, is that the Pokemon community is okay with the games not having all the Pokemon. So what we can do from then on is either rotate our Pokemon, so say this generation you won't get Lilligant, but next generation you will, but instead you're not going to get Hitmontop. Or probably not Hitmontop because it's related to Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee, and those are Gen 1 Pokemon, and they're pretty much here to stay, let's be honest. Gen 1 fans kind of want those for understandable reasons. Just like Gen 2 fans want their Gen 2 Pokemon and Gen 3 Pokemon, by Gen 3 fans. You see what I'm kind of getting at here. But, so you're going to get Lilligant in the next game. Say, Ultra Sword or Divine Sword or whatever they decide to call it. But they're going to drop Honchkrow. There, that's a Pokemon that we can use for Ultra and Divine Sword. Well, that bites. I really liked Honchkrow too, but hey, I got my favorite Pokemon back. But then the next game, both Honchkrow and Lilligant aren't in because they're in like Gen 9, I guess you could say. and they've added a bunch of new Pokemon that they want to be the showcase, and so they took out a bunch of earlier gen Pokemon, and this system just is not conducive to Pokemon battlers. This is not conducive to the fan base. It just kind of tears it apart at the seams and leaves behind beloved friends. I've got, for example, a Shiny Pineco I would love to bring forward to keep it modern, to keep it close on a technological system that is supported instead of dying hardware like the 3DS. That's another reason to bring forward stuff. But if you're doing this, I can't do that. And why should I buy Pokemon Home if I can't even really use it because all the Pokemon in the Galar region are the only ones I'm going to get anyway? It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. Because every Pokemon I can get is already in this game. I can't bring in Pokemon from previous generations. I can't bring in the Pokemon that won the Pokemon League in X and Y. I can't bring in the Pokemon that won against Steven in Omega Ruby. I can't bring in the Pokemon that won against Lance in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. I can't do these things. And that's the problem. You're cutting out so much by doing this. Anyway, I have rambled on for half an hour, and I apologize for that. This was more meant to be a news thing, but I didn't do a very good job with the news thing because it became too personal. And that's something that I'm really respecting newscasters on being able to do. Keeping it professional, not allowing it to become personal. I need to work on that, but I'm not there, obviously. So, until then, hopefully next time my next newscast won't be so personal. Goodbye.